Everyone, thank you for staying with us. We should be ending our tea break now, and I'm going to make sure that we have our panelists back on as we presented them. Can I just check? Manik Bandari from Falcon AI, are you back on?
Present. I'm here.
Great. Okay, cameras on. Shinwi from Pan AI. Yep, Shinwi.
I'm here.
Great. Let's see who else was there. Suraj. Oh no, it was Zishan. Zishan.
Hey, I'm here.
Zishan is there. Good. Suraj, I think I saw you. No, did I see you? Suraj, are you still there?
Yep, here I am.
Okay, good. Suraj is around. Jeffrey.
Hello.
Jeffrey. And this is the mystery man. We haven't seen him yet, but Raju Chalam. Calling Raju. Are you there, Raju?
I am here.
Raju, yes. Okay, Raju. Raju is the chief editor of the AI ethics and governance body of knowledge that we've created here at the Singapore Computer Society. It is a body of knowledge that that continues to be collated, but it's a valuable resource for those who are interested in the topic and want to see what has been happening in that area. So Raju has been keeping up there, and he's put all his effort down and all his knowledge into this body of knowledge that we've created. And so, great. Thanks for joining us. Before we jump straight into the questions, I wanted to just take a review of some of the polls that we have done, as well as the word count. So, the word cloud, sorry. And so this is the word cloud, if you remember, we were working on. You see a lot of words getting associated there in the minds of people when we talk about big data and AI. So automation, obviously, robotics, we saw some of that, machine learning, analysis, cloud, privacy, intelligence prediction, big data, data analytics, security, another big word that's associated with this area, logarithms, wow, okay, data mining, cost savings, collective expertise, okay, world transformation, wow, trial and error. Okay, so when we talk about big data and AI, that's what people have in mind. Let's also now look at the poll results that we've conducted for the 3 polls. So first question, my organization plans to use AI. 21% using now, great. 10% intending to use it this year, 22% next year, and 55% not so sure. Okay. Next question, my organization uses big data analytics. 28% yes, 50% no, not sure, 22%. So some people sitting on the fence, but a lot of people not using big data analytics currently. And for the proposition that AI and machine learning offers more benefits and should be promoted, 89% or almost everyone says yes. No one says no, and a small percentage, 11%, says not sure. Okay, let's keep the panel discussion up there while we move straight into the panel, right? And let's see, we've got a couple of questions. Let me just throw a big question out to everyone first. So big data and AI, we've seen people associate a lot of words with big data and AI, some positive, some negative. From your experience, guys, is AI still, is still in hype mode? More talk than fire, more smoke than fire, more talk than action. Are we still at this hype stage, or is reality beginning to set in? Are people actually working on it? Is it going live right now? Are there many companies using AI? Tell me your experiences.
So I think I would say yes too. I think some people it is still a hype, and there is some miscommunication around what AI is and what is analytics and what is big data. I think a lot of people have started using it interchangeably, but the practitioners will sort of know the difference. So I think Like for instance, if there are some people who use a lot of dashboards, BI, and sometimes if you ask them, are you using AI? Actually, they can give a very naive answer and say yes. And on the other extreme side, you have very sophisticated applications of AI, which people have already started using. And we saw a few of those examples even during COVID-19. Like for instance, what the government did in terms of and then I think earlier on we were playing some videos where the CEO of IS was sharing a few examples that even looking at symptoms and imagery data from medical diagnostics and then using AI to then detect whether a person has had COVID or not. So I think those are examples where AI is being used, but without making it such a big deal that we are using AI. It has just sort of being embedded in some applications. But I think the focus, as long as it's on driving outcomes and driving some value, I think that's good. But a lot of people also do disfavor to AI by just using that word very loosely here and there. And I think in my 20 plus years of experience in that space, I mean, the first industry which really started was more, I mean, the telcos and the banks, because they had a lot of transactional data. They had a lot of communication data in terms of, emails and interactions with the call center. So they just had a lot of data. And then from there, it sort of moved into how can we make sense of the data and get people to buy more things, transact more, because you've got, a value there. You make money if you can take the right action. So if it's an insurance company selling more insurance policies by using AI, it makes sense. Then slowly it also started getting into the health and public sector side. If you look at smart city, surveillance, detecting whether some place has caught fire, and AI processing, all of that. So I think it's getting there, but I think I was quite surprised to see that 55% people actually said that they're not sure whether their organization use AI. My hypothesis is actually that 80-90% of the companies are probably using AI, and they're probably quite sophisticated in the sense that you don't get to know that you're using AI, but you're just using it, every day. So if you're using Facebook, Twitter, whatever you're using, I think most of the applications these days we use have some element of AI in there already.
So in your view, there is already a lot of application of AI in the business world, in the daily tasks, except that people don't quite know. Okay, I'm going to put Suraj and Shinvi on the spot. How about you guys? What do you think?
Well, here's how, when you think about the Gartner hype cycle, which where the hype is, it's a way of measuring hype. And I think we've hit that peak, the first peak of inflated expectations, and now we're steadily climbing down the other side. We haven't quite hit that point where it becomes fully, accepted and understood. And that hype is of two natures in manufacturing. One is AI will do everything. AI is magic. AI is like this thing I turn on and then everything just happens automatically. And the other side is AI is terrible. It's going to take away everyone's jobs, etc. Both of these. So I've been heartened in the last few years that manufacturers are coming out of that space and they're saying they're looking at AI like any other tool, like they used to look at statistics years ago and say, well, these are tools that we apply. We are learning how to take these tools and apply them to solve the kind of problems we have. And that's what they are. They're not going to solve everything in a day. Yes, there are limitations to what AI can do, and we need to put in a huge amount of work. And I think the most important thing that manufacturers have learned is we can't get away without our engineers. Our engineers inform, develop, and manage and govern AI. And that's how AI does its magic. So I feel like we're climbing down that hype cycle. Manufacturers are looking very clearly at what it can do. They're neither as afraid or as naive about the possibilities. And the best part is they're looking to value. They're saying, how does AI help me earn more money? How does AI help me grow my business? How does AI help me create new revenue streams? And that is a positive development. It's been happening over the last few years. I think it's accelerated in 2020. And I've been very happy to see that shift.
Okay, Shinvi, anything?
I would 100% agree with what Suraj was saying. In fact, what we are seeing is among the financial institutions, a lot of bankers and finance professionals have started to become a lot more sophisticated when it comes to using AI. and they are also more knowledgeable behind in understanding the theory behind many of these AI applications. But most importantly, like what Suresh was saying, they have moved past the hype stage of of using AI to create a pet project as a next shiny sexy toys, but really thinking about how to use AI to drive business value. So I'm being, like Suresh, hardened to see that happening. I think as an industry, we AI providers and vendors also has to play a role to not overhype the capabilities of AIs. There is a gap between the theoretical limit versus the practical implementations. I think this is something that as an industry's AI practitioners need to be aware of, so that we don't oversell ourselves, we don't overhype a particular solutions, so that we can talk in terms of business values with our clients.
Okay, good. I'm glad Suraj mentioned this thing about the curve. One of the things in the early days when we talk about AI, and inevitably people think about robots, and then the next thing they think about is Terminator. The robot is going to come and kill all of us, and we're going to lose all our jobs. I'm glad we didn't go there, because that's not where everything is heading. And we are now looking at really harnessing the technology for its good. But since we are still in the scare mode, I noticed that one of the questions that has been posed, drawing from some of the videos that you guys have put up, right? So somebody here is kind of worried that they become an unintentional social media star because some of the videos were taken in shopping malls and workplaces. And the question is privacy a concern? Okay, is there an invasion of privacy, of data protection breaches when we talk about AI? Okay, I'm going to first ask Jeffrey to jump in, and then maybe Manik or anyone else in the panel. So Jeffrey, that's yours.
Thank you, Brian. I mean, I put in a statement in response. Maybe just to elaborate further, at the end of the day, we're talking about mere recording of videos themselves. We have to understand what was the purpose behind the recording of the video. We don't have a concept of privacy in our Singapore law per se. What we do have is data protection. And what the rules set in place are limitations as to whether you should be collecting data for what particular purposes, if there's appropriate consent and there's appropriate notification. And if you collected data for a particular purpose, you shouldn't be repurposing it for another purpose that you didn't notify or get consent for, So in terms of what's right, what's wrong, there's no, it really does boil down to context. So if you're talking about a person recording someone at a video shopping mall, doing a CCTV recording, for example, it's legitimate if you notify and tell the individual that, yes, I'm recording the CCTV live on the premises, and the purposes are for prevention of crime, for security, etc. Those are things which are fairly defensible, and they're quite reasonable for their purposes. And if you put the appropriate notifications, a person stepping into a mall might therefore have been given sort of a notice of this happening, and they could have certain rights over the footage, but at the end of the day, it's fair play. On the other hand, if we were to take the footage and say, okay, let's do some analytics here, let's repurpose and let's do an application, say, for example, crime detection of individuals who have shoplifted before, and using facial recognition, identify if that person might be entering a shop. That's a very different discussion, because then we are thinking about predicting the potential for a crime. And even though we say it's crime prevention, the individual may not have already stolen, for example. And then you have these other bit larger question of, well, where did you get the footage in order to train the machine to identify this individual? Was that data that was collected repurposed other than from its original source purposes? So there are legal restrictions and complexities around that. So in terms of, is there an intrusion in privacy? Potentially there is, but if you don't think of it in terms of privacy, but in terms of illegal repurposing of data. And that's one of the things that I think big data and AI faces as a general challenge, that a lot of the transactional data that you have, a lot of the data that you record and you pick up through IoT and sensors, to the extent that it is personal data, it may have been collected under one set of circumstances, and there may have been an original understanding as to why that data was collected. To repurpose it for other uses, there are a lot more limitations around that, and there are certain ways in which you need to do it properly. And so, at the end of the day, it could be unlawful if you didn't jump through the appropriate hoops, if you didn't take the appropriate steps to arrange for the appropriate governance elements put in place.
So, Brian, can I jump in here because I have some views about privacy? And since Jeffrey has given a legal point of view, I would rather give a layman's point of view. I think
Okay, sure. Yep.
we should look at privacy from two separate angles. One is invasion of privacy for commercial ends, which should be regulated by law such as PDPA. The other is privacy for law enforcement or national defense or for protecting vulnerable people like children or the elderly or people with dementia or Alzheimer's. I think it's not a black and white question. When human lives are in danger, privacy should take a back seat. And then coming back to the first question also, which whether AI is still as a hype stage, the important thing to note is that Singapore is very serious about leveraging AI. In November 2019, the government announced $500 million to boost AI development and deployment. In November 2020, the government announced $2.2 billion to boost training in AI, cybersecurity, and data. So AI is the next tech frontier, and Singapore wants to lead in it. And I think we can, as long as we get the legal framework in place, which is where Jeffrey comes in. Thanks.
And just to
Thanks,
add,
Ruth. Yeah.
I think the legal point of view is really important. And then as solution providers, we basically have to also work with the partners to see how the AI is being used and deployed from a workflow perspective. So the example I was giving earlier in terms of, somebody has an accident, falls down, and you need to send help. The way it is structured is that, the AI is running on the edge so that the data actually is not leaving the premises. It doesn't leave the mall actually. So the AI runs in the mall itself. It detects an accident has happened and then only sends back an alert, which basically says that, okay, on the third floor near that shop, an accident may have happened. Please go and investigate. So as we think through these processes, I mean, this whole process is now completely compliant because the data is not, because from a legal point of view, you're collecting the data. And the purpose is really to ensure the security and the safety of all the people who are visiting it. And the data is not leaving the organization. The only thing which is going is a simple alert, which basically says, let's send some help there. So the only point I wanted to sort of re-emphasize was that, when you develop a system, you may develop it from the point of, is it compliant with the legal framework? But along as the system evolves and different users come from the same system, in this case CCTV, and AI will continuously evolve. But every time you develop an AI and build an application or a workflow around it, you probably need to revisit the legal framework and then see whether that is still compliant or not compliant.
I hear you, Manik. So what you are really emphasizing, you're advocating here is design by, privacy by design thinking. You always have privacy at the forefront for every design feature that you put in, and you're always evaluating and re-evaluating how much data you need and how much data you don't need for every situation. Thank you for that. Let's just skip on a little bit to a slightly different question that has come from the floor also. I'm trying to look for that. Okay, so it's a bunch of questions, I think, by people in slightly different scenarios, but I think we can kind of group them together. One talks about RPA. Okay, so RPA seems to be an application of AI that could be useful. How can it be used in accounting and finance processes? How can it be used in accounting and finance processes? And slightly different question, for common workplace processes such as HR operations, in addition to accounting, what kind of AI can be applied there? And the third question, again, around AI in this kind of corporate accounting scenarios, for small companies, okay, so maybe a small accounting firm, a small wholesale trading firm, how would you start on AI and big data, right? Because business scale is small amount of data, a bit simple. Is it really worth embarking on AI for this kind of projects? So I think there are quite a number of people who can probably chime in and add to this. I'm going to cue some of you first, but the rest can obviously chime in. Srijan, maybe, Manik, and Suraj, and maybe Shinvi. Okay, maybe you could start with Srijan. I think we haven't heard from you yet, Srijan.
Okay, sure. Let me start then. So I answered the question online. I think for accounting firms or firms trying to apply this to accounting, HR, and all that, I would say that do it in stages, right? Because if you really want to do sophisticated AI, machine learning, all that, the question is where you're going to apply it, what's the return, right? And quite often you find that that is a long discussion. But on the other hand, if you're just purely looking at automating and doing data analytics, there are already tools out there that you can start doing free, right? So especially for automation, you can use Python, a free open source programming language, to replicate RPA solutions, and we have done it quite a lot in my company. So things like you have to go through your email, extract a file, find some let's say a spreadsheet, and you want to look for one particular row in the spreadsheet with the exception, and after send it to somebody else to take action. All this can be automated, right? So you can actually find that it's quite easy to learn yourself to actually automate that, which is why I think a lot of accounting bodies and all this are starting to teach people Python. So that's automation. So you don't actually, so RPA sounds like, you got to go and get a vendor to do it or that. You don't actually need to. And most of the time you find that what you do is probably too small scale to justify paying for the vendor, but you can just do it yourself. And on the other hand, again, how often are you likely to use big data in your work? Quite rare, but data analytics as an accountant is important, right? I mean, I think traditional way of accountants reviewing, let's say, financial reports before they submit, maybe they print it out and then they compare this year versus last year manually, or put a spreadsheet, this year versus last year or whatever. But you could easily put all this into again another free tool like Power BI, and gives you dashboards, and you can build history. So again, we build things like we have submissions where we have to submit 70 reports at one time to some regulator, and trying to look through them one by one without any manually is painful. Of course, you can implement AI if you have enough data, but even a simple process of building a dashboard and having some rule built in there to say that if this quarter versus last quarter this number is too high, of a certain percentage, highlight to me, right? So you have exception-based reporting that tell you that look at all this thing, and again that's basic data analytics, right? And that is already one above whatever a lot of us are doing now, which is just manually looking at reports, right? So I think start with those first is my advice, and you probably find that you already can automate quite a lot of your own work. And then you start looking at bigger things like chatbot and other things, right? But if you say jump into those things, I think it will be hard to convince people that there's value in it. And you need to be able to get something at the user level that they can see value first before I think you can convince people to do more. But that's my my experience on this.
Okay, maybe Manik, Raju, anyone?
I mean, I would just like to say that, if you're a small firm and I think the purpose is not really to start building AI applications, because building AI applications is also quite expensive. You need the talent, you need to know the tool. It may not be your core focus area. But if you have a better appreciation of what AI can do, then you can yourself think through, okay, I have this business problem. Can AI be a solution? And there may be providers out there already who are providing them quite cheaply, because these days the AI service providers have also, changed to like a software as a service or transaction based model. And instead of hiring, so for instance, if you want to do forecasting of your sales, you may not have to build that model yourself. There are online calculators, you can feed it there, and then you just use it as an API. So I think just a healthy appreciation, but keeping the focus on what is the problem that you're trying to solve, and then looking for a solution out there which does that. So outsourcing or using a software is not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to have an appreciation of what use cases and problem statements can be solved by AI, and then look for those right partners or solutions to do that, to keep the cost down.
I think
Okay.
one thing to consider when embarking on an AI journey is to look at
Adequately solved by using a simpler methodology by AI, but then an AI methodology might allow you more scale. So it really comes down to what I would say is people must really look at the actual problem and the value of solving the problem in one way or another. One part of that, one piece of advice that I would give companies is, again, just like Manik said, understand, get a deeper appreciation of AI itself, and then build trusted advisors. Find trusted advisors who can help you understand and work through the value of solving some of these problems with you. I also did want to talk a little bit about the question that you threw out a lot of questions right now. There was a question around HR and how they can use. Now, a lot of companies in the space have transactional data, existing data, and one thing that AI truly helps is discovery, being able to find patterns and insights in data. For example, we've had companies answer questions like, what are the factors that what are the factors from the data that we can determine that are most likely to retain our employees? What are the factors that determine whether a learning program is actually effective or not? So these kinds of discovery questions are well suited towards data mining, using machine learning to detect patterns in that data.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's move on, I think, to our last question. And I'm going to move the focus a little less on law, less on application and technology, but to the role of ethics, right? Whether it is morally right or wrong to use AI. And so the question here is, what role does ethics play in AI currently? And what role should it play? And if ethics is important, what's the answer to that? Self-regulation or legislation? Okay, I'm going to ask Raju to kick off this,
Yep.
and maybe Jeffrey, you want to chime in, and any of the other panelists then. So Raju, that's yours.
Yes, so thanks, Brian. I think technology is always 2 steps ahead of legislation anywhere on earth. Until legislation catches up, we have other laws and regulations that can be applied for any AI related infractions, such as PDPA or the Computer Misuse Act, and others that our esteemed lawyer Jeffrey Lim can enlighten us more. But more importantly, Singapore was the first in the world to set up an AI ethics and governance body of knowledge, which is available for all of you free of charge to go out and check. And a lot of chapters out there are free and available for download. And 2 of the authors from the BOK are with us, Jeffrey Lem and Manik Bandari. We have a total of 60 people, including some of the top luminaries who have contributed to this AI ethics and governance body of knowledge. Please go to the SCS website, go to the link, download a lot of free chapters. There are technical stuff, there is legal stuff, there is ethical issues, there are thought leadership articles, and everything that you would need for self-regulation until the actual regulations or the legal system kicks in. All the best.
Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, your mic's off.
Sorry. Thank you, Raju, and thanks, Brian, for letting me know. Yeah, I'd like to echo that. And I think the way I look at it from the legal perspective is that there are already existing laws that condition the way in which we act, whether we and how we use a tool, how we use a technology. It's an open question as to whether we need anything specific in relation to AI to AI applications. And I suspect various sectors, certain industries will find that perhaps they will articulate uses, certain restrictions, legally enforceable restrictions or conditions for the use of AI. We see that, for example, in the trial of, say, driverless cars. We're seeing that emerge in other particular fields. But to say that someone has a global vision of everything and how it would all work, I think it's a little bit harder to crystallize that as a legal construct. It's more likely that people will think these things through in matters of ethics. And that's why ethics, I think, is there, because ethics is kind of a sense of a principled way by which you sort of conduct an analysis of situations, and it goes deeper than law, because it's, you know, you can have a person who's highly ethical in the way he conducts himself, and he doesn't necessarily hold himself just to legal standards. He holds himself to higher principles, and I think ethics is important because sometimes ethics can crystallize and become laws over time, but in other ways it also filters into other ways in which you apply yourself. So it's not a question of right and wrong from a legal standpoint. It certainly is right and wrong from a larger perspective. So I think ethics is important because the greater power and ability that we accord with AI solutions, the greater the chance of harm, and also the potential for benefits not being properly shared, or prejudices arising, or biases occurring. And we want to really have a kind of a fluid discussion that can adapt to situations, perhaps more fluid than law itself. Yeah. So that's my two cents on that.
Okay, thanks, Jeffrey. I think that's a good insight that of the role of ethics and how we could play even in the development of the area. Before we end off, I am going to give each of our panelists a chance to share their top 3 tips on fulfilling the promise of big data and AI. Okay, your top 3 tips. Okay, I'm going to limit each of you to 1 minute. So 3 tips in 1 minute. Let's start off in order of the presentation. So moving from Manik to Zichen, Shinwi, Suraj, Jeffrey, and then finishing off with Raju. Okay, so Manik, it's all yours. Top 3 tips in 1 minute.
I hadn't given this question a thought, so I'll wing it. But basically, start with the problem, not the solutions, and so that's one. Second is, you don't need to be an AI expert yourself. You can always find people to help you do that. And then the third one is, not every problem is solvable by AI. So get an appreciation of what can or cannot be done by AI. Otherwise, you will spend a lot of time, a lot of resources, and you will be disappointed in the end.
Okay, great. Zichen.
I would echo what Manik said. So 2 things, right? One, again, as he said, understand what is it that you're trying to apply this to? What challenge what value you're trying to get out of it? So that's one. Second is, I think somebody else also mentioned earlier, understand what the whole technology can do, right? Because obviously sometimes, as Jeffrey I think said in the thing, right, earlier, when you look at the news, so that you give an impression that AI can replace everybody and kill everybody's job and whatever, and can do all sorts of magic. But when you really get into the technology, understanding all that, we're not there yet, right? Maybe in 50 years, 100 years, depending on who you believe, we might get there. But in the meantime, there are limitations. And as Manuk said, understanding the limitations is important, because if not, then you just I think overpromise to your management and under-deliver, and also spend a lot of money on something that probably give you less value than what you think.
Okay. Don't overpromise and underdeliver. Shin Wee.
I'm afraid I'm going to say something fairly similar. Number one, identify your business objective. Number two, identify who your target audience are. And number three, find a solutions. Now, if it's an AI solution, great. If it's not an AI solutions, doesn't matter so long as it works. So that's it for me.
Okay, thank you. Suraj, maybe a little bit more about manufacturing.
Well, I love that we're all
manufacturing.
coming out to the same points, but it's not very different. Focus on decisions and business value. Find your trusted advisors to help you understand and build a roadmap of use cases within your manufacturing organization. Find, very important for manufacturers, find an executive sponsor. So if you're the C-level, well, you're sorted. If you're not, find a C-level or very close to the C-level sponsor who can help drive this. Because AI, believe me, in manufacturing enterprises, AI never stays in one siloed area. It flows quickly across the organization. And having an executive sponsor who can understand and drive your roadmap with the C-suite absolutely helps you get to value quickly.
Okay, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said previously. I don't think I can add much except maybe one thing, which is that perhaps one of the things that we should be paying attention to when we're thinking about adopting or applying AI is we should be deconstructing what we already do to understand what we truly do. Because if you get to the essence of what you're really offering to your customers or to solving a particular problem, you begin to appreciate the real value of AI and you can see what's relevant, what's not. So that's my 2 cents.
So very much instead of trying to sell the hammer, you're actually selling the hole instead. I see. Okay, good. And Raju, I'm going to let you round it off.
Okay, I'm going to round it off by saying there are 3 tips. I'm going to say go for A, B, and C.
Okay.
A is for accept the fact that AI is going to become more pervasive in our life, work, and play. It's going to take decisions sometimes without human involvement. So accept that. B is begin your learning journey on new technologies by taking intro courses on Coursera, Udemy, or even SCS, which has chapters on AI, big data, cloud, where they hold education sessions free for members. Just join SCS and join the chapters. And C, call or connect with your bank or healthcare institution or government agency if you feel that an automated decision taken by the organization has been biased or unfair or not transparent. The only way bias can be removed from algorithms is when exceptions are attended to. So don't be afraid of challenging decisions that you think were biased, unfair, unexplainable, or not transparent enough. You will be doing society a great benefit. Thank you.